Welcome. Today we're going to talk about congruent polygons. A correspondence is a way of matching up two sets of objects. Congruent figures have the same size and shape. This is the symbol that we read out loud as congruent. It's like an equal sign with a tilde above it. Congruent. If two polygons are congruent, all of their corresponding sides and angles are congruent. In other words, they're the same size and shape. So congruent figures have the same size and shape. Similar figures have the same shape, but not the same size. Dr. Evil and Mini-Me are similar. Here's a pair of triangles, which are congruent. So we would say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle. Now here's the important part. When we name congruent figures, we name the corresponding parts in the same order. So when we name the second triangle, first we want to name the corner, or the corner that is congruent to angle A. Which angle corresponds to angle A? And that would be Y. Next, we want to name the part that corresponds to angle B, because that's the order, right? A, B, C. So what corresponds to part B? Looking at the two figures, I would say that that corresponds to X. And finally, angle C corresponds to angle Z. Okay, so then we would say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle YXZ. Since they're congruent, we know that all their angles and all their sides are congruent. So let's name all the corresponding parts which are congruent. The angles will have the same measure, and the sides will have the same length. So we already said the angles once. We can go through and just list them off. We can write this as follows. Angle A is congruent to angle Y, and we can see that they both equal 90 degrees. Angle B is congruent to angle X, and angle C is congruent to angle Z. That's naming all the corresponding angles. Now, if you have a congruent statement like we do here, naming the two triangles as congruent, then you can read those angles really off of the statement. We can see that A corresponds to Y, B corresponds to X, and C corresponds to Z. As far as the sides, you can also see the first two letters are AB. So that's going to correspond to side YX if we've named the triangles correctly. So AB is congruent to YX. That means that they would be the same length. Similarly, if you look at the last two letters, BC and XZ, well, those are going to be corresponding sides, and since we already know the triangles are congruent, therefore the sides are congruent. Side BC will have the same length, will be congruent to side XZ. And finally, if we look at the first and last letter of the triangle, AC will be congruent to YZ. Now, here are a pair of triangles. We have triangle ABC and QRP, and we can see, well, it's asking us to write a congruent statement, and we can see which parts correspond to one another. I can see that AC has one tick mark, and so does PQ, so that's showing us that those are congruent. So when they have the same number of tick marks, it's telling us that they are the same length. Just like PR has 3 tick marks, and so does CB. And RQ has 2, and AB has 2. So those parts are congruent. And we can see the angles as well. 25 degrees equals 25 degrees, 65 matches 65. And of course the right angles match one another. So if we want to name a congruent statement, we just have to name 3 parts that match and then name the triangles properly. For example, I'm going to name an angle and a side and an angle, which is one of the ways that you're allowed to do it. So angle A corresponds to angle Q, and they both equal 90 degrees, so they're congruent. The side that we'll name, how about if we try that AC is congruent to QP? We can see they each have 1 tick mark. That indicates they're equal. And finally, angle C is congruent to angle P. They both measure 65 degrees. So this is one of the tried and true methods to go angle, side, angle. And when you get to geometry, you'll learn side, 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 and side, angle, side. But we'll just rest with this and go ahead and name the corresponding parts as we name the triangles. So that would be ABC is congruent to QRP. And once again, it means that all their sides have equal measure and all their angles as well. So here's a pair, and it's showing us that they're congruent, right? The symbol is there. It says in the figure, quadrilateral JIHK is congruent to quadrilateral QRST. So you can see which parts are congruent to one another, which correspond to one another, just from the names. We can see that J goes with Q, I and R, H matches S, and K corresponds to T. So this can help us figure out some missing parts. It's telling us to find C. C is, well, it's inside angle T. We can see here that angle T measures C plus 10 degrees. And since angle T corresponds to K, this can help us write a little equation. So I'm sure you can figure it out right now, right? We can see that angle K is congruent to angle T. Angle K equals 30 degrees, so 30 degrees equals C plus 10. Now, this is a simple one-step equation. We'll subtract 10 on each side, and we find that 20 degrees is the measure of C, right? Because 20 plus 10 makes 30. So same figure, this time find B. Why don't you try this one on your own? Check back with me. So you can see that here in angle H, that the measure of angle H is 4B degrees. And the angle H corresponds to angle S. So we'll say that angle H is congruent to angle S. Therefore, 4B degrees equals 120. And we'll just divide both sides by 4. 4 divided by 4 equals 1. So that's 1B, or B alone. And 12 divided by 4 is 3. So 120 divided by 4 equals 30. B equals 30. And there's Ernie. Good dog.